Clean Water and Sanitation, and I am honored to be moderating today's conversation. This is the beginning of the ADS youth stages, so I'm super excited for the youth energy, the innovation, and the solutions that we're all going to discuss today. Africa Dialogue Series is officially back, and the 2026 edition is taking place throughout the month of May under the theme of Water and Sanitation for Life, harnessing water resources for the Africa we want. And this aligns with the 2026 theme adopted by African heads of states, assuring sustainable water availability and safe sanitation systems to achieve the goals of Agenda 2063. So, this conversation is especially important because water is a strategic resource that affects every aspect of development, from public health to agriculture to energy, climate resilience, industrialization, peace, and economic transformation. So, the ADS 2026 aims to advance political commitment and practical pathways for strategic asset management approaches to water and sanitation across Africa. And this year's dialogue is organized under three important sub-themes. So I encourage you to stay in tune throughout May because these themes are going to be explored through documentaries, interviews, webinars, youth stages, culture showcases, and finally the high-level policy dialogue that will bring together policymakers and stakeholders from across the continent. So today's discussion is much bigger than the continental it's part of a much larger continental conversation on Africa's future. So again, I want to thank the panelists, organizers, partners, youth leaders, researchers, advocates, and attendees for joining us today. And I'm super excited for this youth stage and as we're engaging in something that's youth centered. So at this time, I have the utmost honor to invite the director of the United Nations Office of the Special Advisor on Africa to deliver opening remarks, Mr. John Paul Adams. Take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eugenia, and good morning to everyone. And I've not been able to put my flag in the chat, but I'm very happy, even though I'm joining you from New York, to wave my Seychelles flag as well as
Yes.
my UN flag to talk about this extremely important and timely issue around the African Union theme of the year of water and sanitation for life, harnessing water resources for the Africa we want. And it's great for me to have this opportunity on behalf of Undersecretary General Christina Duarte to speak at this Africa Youth Stages to kick us off, and particular to emphasize the role that young people will play in terms of delivering this strategic asset management approach that we would like to see with regards to water, but also more broadly, all of Africa's strategic resources. The management of all of Africa's resources is always a generational question because the decisions we take today affect lives today and tomorrow. And today's session is especially important because it places African youth at the center of the conversation that will shape Africa's development trajectory for generations to come. And what we want to hear from some of the young experts is what are the missing ingredients? What are the missing ingredients that we need to put in place to try to put in place this strategic asset management framework around water systems? I hope you have all had a chance to review the policy brief, which is guiding this discussion, and which delivers a clear message that water in Africa is not just a service. It is an essential service, but beyond that, it is a strategic asset. It's a powerful connector. And Eugenia, you've already mentioned the role that it plays in a number of sectors, but in particular, in addition to its role around agriculture, which is very much at the heart of livelihoods across the continent, and therefore also key to Africa's industrialization, is also the role that water plays in delivering a peaceful continent. And without water security, Africa's ambitions under Agenda 2063 or under SDG 6 will never be realized. It's no secret that we face serious challenges and that we are off track in relation to particular targets on universal access to safely managed water and sanitation. Progress, while it has taken place, is insufficient. And also, even when we have managed to invest in infrastructure, many of these systems suffer from weak maintenance and poor governance. So the result is not just the service failure, but also a brake on economic development, an acceleration of environmental degradation, and ultimately, and perhaps most crucially, declining public trust. Water governance, therefore, is about good governance across the whole continent. When we're talking about strategic asset management, we're looking at it as a way of shifting the focus from short-term emergency issues to being addressed to the building of long-term value and sustainability. It's about looking at planning, operating, maintaining, and renewing water and sanitation systems across their full life cycle so that investments not only deliver durable economic and societal gains, but actually lead to generate surplus. By integrating water systems into Africa's economic ambitions, we can generate the resources to be reinvested to deliver safe access to drinking water across the continent. And we must also look at this in the context of delivering a climate resilient Africa and addressing Africa's adaptation needs to climate change. This means recognizing the critical role of water-related ecosystems such as watersheds, wetlands, and aquifers, and looking at these natural assets as precisely a key form of infrastructure that must be protected to ensure resilience and long-term water security. Since I've been working in the UN, one example that really struck me was when I was at the Economic Commission for Africa and we were working in Rwanda. And we saw, as demonstrated by the Ministry of Finance there, that the cost of managing wetlands, which would reduce the risk of flooding, was tens of thousands of dollars per year. Whereas in areas where flooding did take place, because there had been no management of the wetlands, the cost of addressing the impact of that flooding translated into millions of dollars. That is an example to show what we mean by strategic asset management, investing in the water sector in a way which is intentional and transformative. So allow me to emphasize a few key points that can take us forward towards strategic asset management. First of all, because young people will live the longest with the consequences of today's water choices, whether those choices strengthen resilience and opportunity or perpetuate vulnerability or inequality, but we must make sure, therefore, that young people have a voice at the table and that they are shaping policies today. Secondly, strategic asset management can open the doors for youth leadership and innovation because strategic asset management is about objective management tools, using digital tools, data systems, geographic information systems, remote sensing, and emerging technologies, including artificial intelligence, to help us better understand how water assets contribute to our economic growth, how we can monitor those water assets and invest in them for transformation of our economies. African youth are already at the forefront of these solutions, but we must make sure that this is done more systematically in global processes at the UN and also in regional processes in the African Union and nationally through our respective governments. And thirdly, water governance is about inclusion, accountability, and regional cooperation. Most of Africa's water resources are shared. They are shared across borders. And young voices are essential in shaping cooperative, forward-looking approaches that support peace and shared prosperity. So as we embark on this discussion over a month, Eugenia has laid out the different steps that we are taking. I encourage you to be bold in terms of the ideas that you will float. The only bad ideas are the ones that are not discussed. We should challenge assumptions, share innovative ideas, and ensure that water is this super connector that we want it to be, that allows us to implement strategic asset management in a way which is transformative for all Africans. Because Africa's water future is not only something young people will inherit, it is something they must design. So thanks so much, and I look forward to the discussions. I will have to drop off, unfortunately, shortly, but I will come back towards the end. So I look forward to seeing the outcomes of the discussions. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. John Paul Adams. Thank you for your insightful remarks about how water governance is not just about good governance across the continent, and strategic asset management is a way to amplify youth leadership and how water assets can contribute to our social economic growth. Thank you again for your remarks, and I believe that As we move into today's panel discussion, I really want us to reflect briefly on how this sub theme matters so deeply. Africa is a home to one of the youngest populations in the world, and young people are not simply stakeholders in conversations around water governance and sanitation, but we are innovators, we are researchers, we are organizers, engineers, advocates, and solution builders. So, yet across the continent, many communities continue to face challenges related to sanitation access, infrastructure gaps, financing, and much more. And today's discussion is therefore not only about identifying challenges, but it is about exploring practical solutions. It's about long term thinking, and it's about sustainable systems, and most importantly, youth leadership. So, water touches every sector of development from agriculture, health, urbanization, peace, energy, and economic transformation. So, today we gather not only to discuss water, but to discuss Africa's future. And we are honored to be joined today by an incredible group of youth leaders, researchers, experts across water governance, sanitation, sustainability, climate resilience, and innovation. Today's panelists are starting with Mr. Agenda Paul Attabong, who is a PhD candidate and researcher from the University of Yaoundé. We have Miss Kambuso Fury, president of the Youth Wash Ambassadors Club. We have Dr. Georgino Chouna, environmental engineer and chair of the communications committee at the UNESCO Groundwater Youth Network. And last but not least, Mr. Aziz Abubakar, founder and executive director of the Sustainable Solutions for Green Growth. Before we begin, I would also like to kindly remind our panelists that each intervention should be kept approximately to 3 minutes. And with that said, let's begin our discussion. Starting with Mr. Agenda, your research spans wastewater treatment, natural-based solutions, and sanitation systems. How can young researchers and technical practitioners help shift the way we design and manage water infrastructure, moving away from short-term project thinking towards long-term strategic asset management that support public health and climate resilience? Take the floor. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Regina. I hope you are getting me.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, with all protocols observed, good afternoon to everyone. Good afternoon to my dear panelists, and good afternoon to everyone present that decided to join this dialogue. Okay, the question you asked, I want to answer this as a young researcher working inside these systems, not just observing from the outside. So across Africa, only 40% of people have safe water for drinking, and only 30% are known to have safe sanitation. So during the past 5 years, this situation has moved barely, and we are at a financial gap of about $108 billion each year. So the issue is not building more infrastructures. It is that what we are building does not last. So I have worked with wastewater treatments that were built in my lifetime, but are already failing. I have collected samples during my research and also in projects. And you see, you collect samples, but at the end, we discover that these samples, these treatment systems are okay on the papers, but when you want to judge in real case scenarios, they are often not functional. And this is exactly what Africa Water Vision 2063 wants against. We are treating water infrastructures as a project and not as strategic assets. Strategic asset management asks a different question, not how we build, but how systems perform over time under real conditions and real constraints. And that is where young researchers like us are already shifting the system. First, when we sit now, for example, I, as a young researcher, when I sit in a project, I don't ask what is the treatment efficiency. No, I ask who will operate this system in 5 years. Where will the spare part come? Where will the spare parts come from? And what happens if there is a flood or a power cut? This is what aligns directly with life cycle planning and risk assessment in strategic asset management. So first, we are changing the question. We are now trying to understand what is useful knowledge, because the UN system is calling the UN systems call for evidence-based decision making. So in practice, this means we don't only publish success stories, but now it's important for us to document failures, because in my work, showing a system failed helps the practitioner to avoid repeating the same mistakes. And this is how evidence improves asset performance. And we are working on the phase where everyone ignores. For example, when we set up a treatment system, after construction, everybody disappears. And that's what our policy brief is clearly showing, that weak operation and maintenance is one of the causes of failures of our system. So in my research, I stay engaged after commissioning with working with operators, tracking breakdowns, and helping build what I call asset records. That is where resilience is either built or lost. So if we are serious about strategic asset management and about achieving the SDG 6 and the Agenda 2063, here is the real shift. So we should stop treating young researchers as contributors to reports, start positioning them inside the life cycle of assets, fund long-term field engagement, not short-term studies, and embed young engineers into utilities. Let them work on maintenance, system, data, and operation, not only on design, because water, as the African Union states, is a strategic asset for economic transformation, climate resilience, and public health. So an asset only creates value if it is maintained, monitored, and adapted over time. And I think we young researchers are out for that now. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Agenda, for your contributions. I think what you shared is very, very important. I think that it's important that we ask the right questions. Like you mentioned, who will operate this in 5 years? And documenting the failures can also help a practitioner see where systems fail and can improve. And if we shift from seeing water infrastructure as a project into a strategic asset, we can definitely achieve our goals with water and sanitation. So thank you again for your contributions. Moving on to Mrs. Kambuso, I wanted to know, as a young WASH advocate, how do you think we can shift the way communities and decision makers see water and sanitation from just basic services to something worth investing in and protecting long term? The floor is yours. I think she might have dropped, so we'll give her a few seconds to see if she would join back in. Okay. So if Ms. Kambuso joins back in, then we'll jump back into her question. But for now, we'll move into Dr. Jeruno Chona for the interest of time. Moving on to your question, the Africa Dialogue Policy Brief identifies weak human capacity and data gaps as the root causes of the build, neglect, rebuild cycle in water infrastructure. Through youth networks like GWYN, how can member states and the Africa Dialogue series actively equip young water professionals to move from observers to on the ground problem solvers? The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you listen to me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'll start by saying it's a pleasure to be here to speak during this international events to talk about the pressing issue in Africa, and I'm here representing the Groundwater Union Network, which is a network that was founded in 2022 by UNESCO to gather young people who are working on groundwater to carry the voice of groundwater. Talking about changing the youth from observer to problem solver, I think at the Groundwater Union Network, we have a model that have 4 parts. The first part is what we call youth involvement in decision making. How does it work? Is that we are involving youth at the international high level international summit to take decision to contribute in taking decision and also to learn from experienced people at this international event. And this event is one of the priority example of what we are doing now at the Gamma Network. However, there are still some lack that we need to fill, and some of the lacks are awareness. At the groundwater network, we promote awareness on the importance on groundwater. Because why groundwater? Because when you talk about water, people most of the time see surface water. However, groundwater today is one of the main source of fresh water on Earth. And if we consider coastal region, groundwater, coastal aquifers are one of the most important aquifers in the world because coastal regions are expanding with rapid urbanization. And when you have sea level rise too, you have what we call seawater intrusion. So the next step, things we are doing is what we call capacity buildings, where we want now to mentor young researchers with the people in the network to create what we call intergenerational knowledge transfer, where enthusiastic people and advocates of groundwater can learn from people who are already in the field. It can be researcher, can be people at the UN as you guys, and we'll try to transfer this knowledge to young people to make water a culture, where the management of water a culture to us. The last step is what we call using youth to fill data gaps by creating what we call utility research. How does this work? At the and the Gamma Network, what we do is we have research project with young researchers who are very enthusiastic, who use tools like AI and sustainability to provide data for effective decision taking. And also we combine our skill in digital transformation to manage this. So these are the contribution the Gamma Network can put at the table to improve the understandings and also the projection of how to manage water, not just for today, but for the future of Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Giorgino. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. I definitely believe that your contributions around awareness is something that we need to definitely hone in on more so that we can be able to really achieve our goals with water and sanitation. So thank you again for your contributions. Moving on to Mr. Aziz, I would like to know how young people across Africa, they grow up without access to clean water or proper sanitation. From your experience, what role can young people and youth-led organizations play in shaping how these systems are built, managed, and sustained in their communities? The floor is yours.
I think the connection is bad.
Okay. Okay. No problem.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you. And sorry, apologies for the connection issue there, right? So, please could you repeat your question again?
Yes, I would like to know, young people across Africa grow up without clean water or proper sanitation. From your experience, what role can young people and youth-led organizations play in shaping how these systems are built, managed, and sustained in their communities?
Oh, thank you for that amazing question.
Mhm.
So, the narrative I'd like to share today is around, I'm not just seeing young people as victims or as living their lives without access to adequate clean drinking water or water to use for other purposes, right? But to start to see young people as the beneficiaries of water systems and also builders of those systems, right? Young people are innovators. We've seen a lot of young people innovating water purifiers, and leveraging AI and geospatial information systems to research how we can better protect and maintain our water systems, our water infrastructure. And we've also seen young people play the role of accountability drivers as well, helping to hold government accountable for water systems that are failing and having them maintained as well. We've seen young people also in very key global stage and even continental stages as well, like in young Africans who are actually helping to shape strategies around water asset management, strategic planning, and all of that. And at a more community level, right, we see youth organizations like mine as well, who are the most closest to the problem, working across different local communities and integrating the community-led approach, right, into our system, like helping these communities to localize whatever solution that's or intervention that's brought into their communities as well, training them. For example, there's this community in the north that got a water intervention system, and this system has a solar panel to keep it sustainable for a longer period of time. But one issue they had was they didn't think about who's going to fix these solar panels if it goes wrong, right? If things go bad. It was a great idea to have the solar panel installed because of lack of electricity in that rural community, but they forgot that if the solar panel gets spoiled, then how would the pumping machine for the water for the borehole system work, right? So, integrating training, solar maintenance, solar installation trainings into the local community is quite important in ensuring that all these water systems are sustainable. And we're not just coming back to, either fix or rebuild water systems. We're instead thinking about the long-term sustainability of this system. So these are the roles that youth-led organizations like mine also play, with training and capacity building and also helping to strengthen local communities.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aziz, for your contributions. And I agree with the fact that young people should not just be seen as beneficiaries, but builders of these systems. And a way for these systems to be sustainable in communities is by training. So thank you so much for those contributions. I see that Ms. Kambuso has joined again. If you're able to answer your question, I'm happy to share. And your question is, as a young WASH advocate, how do you think we can shift the way communities and decision makers see water and sanitation from just basic services to something worth investing in and protecting long term? Ms. Kambuso, take the floor.
Hello, can you get me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. Apologies for that. So, my contribution is that communities and leaders need to stop seeing WASH as an aid and start seeing it as an investment that has a return. They say for $1 that is invested, you retain about $4 to $5 in lower health costs, productivity, and girls stay in school. So people need to stop seeing wash as an aid or water as an aid, but as an investment. The other thing is that what our previous speaker had said, to say we should be able to push for asset management thinking, where when we install our infrastructure, we're able to, also see how we can maintain it. Who is going to maintain that infrastructure when you install it? So know who is going to maintain it when it's fixed. The money that is needed to fix those infrastructures. And also, young people must become translators between technical experts and also communities, because people do not understand, they do not protect things that they do not understand. So once they understand to say, this borehole that has been drilled in my community is important because it gives me water, they'll be able to protect that thing, and it's going to stay for a long period of time. We also need to challenge the culture of reactive spending, where we spend when there's diseases only. But we have to also, invest when we don't have diseases, because prevention is better than cure, and it's cheaper for you or for a country to prevent a disease than to treat it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kambuso, for your contributions. And I agree that water is not aid, water is an investment, and people and communities cannot protect things they do not understand. So thank you so much for those valuable points. At this time, I would like to now open the floor to the audience for questions or comments. Participants may be able to raise their hand or unmute once recognized. And please kindly keep your interventions to approximately 2 minutes so that we can hear from as many voices as possible. So if there's any questions, please kindly raise your hand and I will call on you and you may unmute. Okay, I'm seeing a few questions in the chat, so I'm going to just read them out, and any of the panelists who wants to answer, you're free to answer. Starting with this question, they said that the speaker mentioned about maintenances of the fertilities. Are there strategies put in place to maintain the available data, because data availability is a problem in hydrology sector? This question wasn't specified by any speakers, so whoever mentioned this can feel free to answer.
Okay, I don't know if I can answer the question.
Yes, feel free.
Okay, let me put a bit here. Okay, that's a very good question. I think there are strategies that exist already. Many countries have operational maintenance framework. They have, because I think the fertility, the participant mentioned is talking about utility. I think it's a typo. So I think many countries have operational and maintenance framework, utility performance guidelines, and integrated water resource management plans and asset management. But the issue here is that in practice, many utilities still operate in reactive mode. So infrastructure is repaired after failure instead of maintained before failure. So one major reason is that maintenance is less politically visible than construction, because a new treatment plan will get inaugurated, but now preventive maintenance does not exist. Meanwhile, there is a whole framework, like I talk about the living registry asset, where we register all the failures, all I think I'll get to it in the next question, all the breakdowns, so that with all this data, we know how we approach problems, we know how to respond or to prevent. So I think there's a whole framework that exists that we cannot explore due to time due to time constraint. But Africa, if we, as I think Kombuso said, if we stop being reactive, I think if we try to implement all these frameworks, then it's going to be quite easy to now consider water as an asset, as our team says. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So I wanted to add a little bit to that answer,
Yes.
if it permits me.
Yes.
All right. So so when you're thinking about data as well, like you're thinking about, okay, for these water systems, how can we track and measure the water, right? The consumption, usage, and all of that. So we can start to think about Internet of Things systems, right? IoT system, IoT devices that could be installed that can, in real time send the data that we need, right, to research facility and to just maintenance facilities as well, so that they can track and see how water is being consumed, how much of it is wasted, how much is wastewater, and all of that, right? So when you think about data sustainability as well, you need to think about how to integrate those IoT systems in place. Well, yeah.
Thank you for that. Does any of the panelists have any other contributions towards this question before we move on to the next one? Oh, go ahead, Georgina.
Okay, I would just want to add something because other people have talked more about water. I would talk about data, hydrological data, that is the incapacity or the inavailability of data. I think one of the things that we can use, or as a proposal to our government, is what we call free data policy. As a young researcher today, when you want to work on water, it's very difficult to have access to data. Either they don't exist or they exist, I don't know where it is. And in my recent PhD research, one of the recommendations was what I call the free data policy imperative. It means that at the level of niche government or local authority, you should be able to have a site somewhere that researcher can find data there to do research in such a way that when you want to work on a particular issue, your main question, your main problem should not be access to data, but it should be the method and the methodology and interpretation of the data. So this is one of the things we can propose to our leaders, like the policy makers. Thank you. You are muted. We can't hear you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for your contributions, Dr. Georgino. Moving on to the next question. Do any of the speakers have thoughts on the role of NGOs in the strategic asset management of water?
Yes, I can come in there as someone who leads a non-profit, non-governmental organization, and especially being a young person as well. So what is the role? And I think I touched on this earlier, right? With one of my the questions that you asked me. What role can NGOs play, right? The NGOs across Africa are we're the most closest to the communities, right? So we can help in capacity building. So when resources are being channeled to us, we can, organize those trainings, workshops. Is either we're training on, different green skills, water system management, plumbing, um, you know, uh, solar system installation, especially for pumping machines, because I mean, you can't pump water from the ground if you don't have electricity to pump it, right? And we know that quite a lot of places across Africa still don't have access to stable electricity. Introducing solar, which is a green renewable system to help to pump water is a great idea, but who's going to maintain that, right? So non-profit organizations or NGOs can, work with partners to train, local community members who live and reside in that community where the water infrastructure is located to actually maintain those systems. We don't have to ship someone all the way from a different country or all the way from abroad to maintain these systems, right? They have to maintain it themselves and keep it running, right? So NGOs can also bring in the SAM approach, right, through the community-led approach. So meaning that strategic asset management can actually be in the hands of these local communities as well, right? So they can be there to co-create these strategies. They're the beneficiaries of the solution. So they have to be integrated through human-centered design in the entire process, right? In the entire strategic asset management process and lifecycle. So these are the roles that I think that NGOs can play, right? Bridging the gap between the local communities and interventions.
Thank you. Does any of the others panelists want to add? If not, I just want to reiterate again that participants, we do urge you to unmute if you're able to ask your questions, because we want to make this as interactive as possible. It's not so much of a formal meeting, but a session where we're discussing these topics. So if you're able to, please do come off mute, raise your hand, and I will call on you, and then you can come off mute and ask your question. But for now, I do see that 2 more questions came in the chat. I'm going to read them. The first one says, Omotola, you raised your hand.
Yes. Hi. I'm Omotola, a recent graduate from Columbia's MPA program. And my question is to the panelists. This is more of a broader question, but I'm keen to get your views on how older generations, have spoken extensively about Africa's wash crisis for decades. So what do you think young people can specifically bring to this conversation that has been missing from past discussions? And from your experiences, do you think decision makers are actually listening?
Okay, I can jump into that. Thank you for asking that brilliant question. So, what role can young people play, or what gap can we bring? What gap can we close, right? As young people, I think that young people are innovators. We bring in a lot of energy, right? We're very young, vibrant. So we bring in a new spirit. We bring in newer ideas, newer approaches to solving things, and through design thinking, human-centered design, incorporating the beneficiaries of these solutions and interventions into these WASH programs, right? Bringing them along from the start to the end of the life cycle, which I believe it's even a loop, right? It's a whole feedback loop, meaning that it's a continuous process, right, of iterating and solving and co-creating solutions together with the community. I feel that young people of this generation are closer to the community, right? We are the receiving end of things, so we're better positioned. A lot of us grew up in Africa with very bad water systems, right? Very poorly maintained systems. So we've seen it. We bring in that component, that reality component to wash programs, right? So we've seen it. We're better positioned to solve these problems, and we bring in our voice as well. And that leads me to answering the question of, do you think that young people are being listened to in the decision-making process? I think that yes, young people are being, even this event alone, having a separate use stage as well is one way of actually integrating youth voices into the UN system, into these decision-making processes when it comes um, I wouldn't say that it is we're being listened to in the highest form possible. It's in different countries, it varies. Decision makers are more integrated in some other countries, in some other African countries than some others. Some still have a long way to go in terms of like actually integrating youth voices into the decision making processes. But for me, I've seen progress way better than 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Yeah. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Can I jump in?
Absolutely.
Okay. Just like Aziz said, I'm 100% okay with him. But the reason what our own role actually is that we are conscious of the fact that we are the people to inherit all these assets that have been set up. So when we ask our question, we look into the future, actually. So, and we observe how the world is evolving with AI and all this stuff. And I think the young generation is better placed and to fill in this gap between our fathers or the senior researchers and the lower community. The same as this was explaining about NGOs. I think even young researchers enter into that frame actually. So we can easily relate with the community, and we can easily relate with the senior researchers. So I think we have a vital role to play, and I think we have started doing it, and we are being listened to. But I think there is still a long way to go. But I think we're on a good path. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Georgina?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what the panelists has already said. I think young people now, so they have tools, they have the knowledge. And what they need now is to connect the tools, the knowledge with the policy makers. One of my perspective is we should be in a cyclic approach, a secular approach. How? A young researcher should be able to translate research into policy. And okay, if I take one example, that's what I'm doing now. I've worked on, after my PhD, I'm now trying to translate all my PhD into what I call policy and strategy brief. Because some of the time, this research are not, they are more in scientific ways. We should be able to translate it to non-scientists and also to these policymakers in the form that they can understand, the form that will make them to understand the problem, the method, the impact if it is solved. I think this will be a step forward, and this is also what we are promoting in our network. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Trino. Ms. Kambuso, I'm not sure if you want to add anything to this question. Okay, yes, I see you raised your hands. Go ahead, Ms. Kambuso.
Thank you very much. So my addition is just an addition to what they've already said. Yes, the older generation is actually listening to us. For us all to be here, it means that we have been included into the conversation. But it also states to say, what do you bring as a youth to the table? Because you cannot just be called and just come and sit down. For us at our organization, we have made sure to say we work in different sectors, as long as wash with climate change, wash with nutrition, in order to broaden our scope and help the government with knowledge, broad knowledge. So recently we had done a study in which we showed to say there's sanitation situation in universities, and it showed our relevance because the older generation were there and they were happy to say young people are doing so much great work. So at the end of the day, it is, what are we doing as youths? We are being included. I know to say it might not be on a very broad aspect, but there is inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your contributions. Before we go into the comments, I want to give those who are able to, who want to ask a question, be able to raise their hand and unmute. And I see that Judith Musa, you've raised your hand. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much to the speakers and to you, Eugenia, for the facilitation. I don't know if any of the speakers has an experience on WASH from a mobile perspective, where there are migrants and refugees in the context of disaster risks like droughts and floods across Africa, especially in the Horn of Africa and maybe parts of West. And also in the case of conflict situations, because in most cases when disaster risks or conflict response is being done, the humanitarian angle of WASH sometimes tends to be kind of left out. And also, if we're already talking about WASH having a problem, even in normal livelihoods of people who are living like kind of permanently in places, then how do we see it from the WASH angle? Of course, there's the argument of the causes of these conflicts, causes of the disasters, but it's a situation that is already there and it's affecting us. So I don't know if any of you has this experience, maybe to comment on that.
Does any of the speakers want to jump in on this question?
Can I try and try to answer?
Yes.
Okay. Well, when we're in a disaster and conflict situation, I think strategic asset management becomes even more important, because the goal now is no longer to optimize, but we are talking now about continuity and survival. So I think one mistake is waiting for a system to collapse always before acting, but resilience can be built and the disaster happens, or before the disaster happens, because some disasters are predictable. So I think some a resilience strategy can be set up even before a disaster happens. I would like to highlight some points. First, I think if we protect critical assets before crisis occur, that is, every country should already have which water points, for example, which treatment plants, for example, which boreholes, which wetlands, which pipeline, which sanitation facilities are essential during emergencies. And those assets now should receive priority maintenance, backup power, emergency supply plans, and even real-time monitoring. And secondly, I sometimes think about the decentralized system. That is, large centralized systems are more vulnerable during flood conflicts and even displacement. So if we think of maybe smaller distributed systems, that is local treatment units, rainwater harvesting, all these nature-based systems, all this that we know, and then we try to involve the communities as the first responders. Because in many emergencies, local communities maintain systems before external actors arrive. So if the strategic asset management must include local maintenance knowledge, or let's say a local youth group or a community monitoring structure before a disaster happens and not after, I think it will help. It will help, or yes, it will have a positive effect. And we must also be able to protect data. As Jorginho was saying, data is very important, and even in coordinating the conflict situation. Because if we lose infrastructure data, we create chaos, because we'll always be responding, trying to look for data up and down, looking for GIS mapping. But if all these are centralized, I think it will help governments and humanitarians to actually know how to respond in a strategic asset management approach. That is, there will be sustainability and longevity. So I think on my part, I think that's what I can contribute. I don't know if I'm answering the question.
Yeah, I wanted to also add to what you said now about data protection and cyber security. In this era where we have like different systems in place to either monitor in real time or track all this water infrastructure and all of that, um, it just presents a newer kind of security threats to our water systems. And that's why we need to have like proper cybersecurity processes and procedures in place to ensure that our systems, these water systems don't get hacked into. I've heard of scenarios where dams were hacked into, right? And they were used as a weapon against the community, right? So we need to start thinking about how to strengthen our data protection systems and also our cybersecurity systems as well to ensure that it is not prone to acts or attack from either within or domestically or internationally as well. So I would like to also put that in place.
Thank you for your contributions. I want to reiterate and encourage participants if they do want to chip in on any of the questions. We want to make this as interactive and as as a discussion. So I see that, I'm sorry if I butcher your name, forgive me. Kakusha wanted to chip in on a question. If you're able to unmute, this would be a good time to share your contributions.
Thank you. Indeed, massacred my name. Yeah, but it's okay. I get that all the time. It's Kachusha, and thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm based in Zambia, and I have been encouraged by the question around the humanitarian space, around immigration, those in migration, and also wars. While we haven't faced any in Zambia because it is a peaceful country, one thing that we acknowledge is that water can be a source of is actually one of the major sources of conflict, and it is true that it is overlooked. So last year there was an attempt to share water bodies from the northern south to the southern side of Zambia, and we saw key traditional leaders literally almost rising because they then did not want that to happen. So we find that that is a real situation, and so I wanted to add that. But then the other is we have organizations like Red Cross that support humanitarian spaces. Recently, what they have started doing is add menstrual hygiene to their wash package because we realize that some elements of wash are neglected when there's conflict and when there's migration. We have had outbreaks of cholera, and in that moment, you find that some people get to move from one space to the other because of fear. So really, the thing that youths can do is to continue to learn more, but also ramp up campaigns that help to prepare before emergencies so that even as people are migrating, their wash rights, their water rights are not neglected during crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Does any other participant want to chime in on any of the questions or share any comments? Feel free to raise your hand and I can call on you and you can unmute. Okay. If not, I'm going to go into the comments, and I see that there was a few questions that came in. Starting with this question, I would like to, this person said, I'm grateful to all the speakers for their works and interventions. I'm also curious to know if and how the non-expert / layman could be involved. At our low level, how can we actively contribute a strategic asset management of our water resources? Participants, speakers, anyone can jump in on this.
Okay, I can go ahead. So participation starts as small as you just saying, stop what you're doing, you're not handling the borehole correctly, you're not handling the toilet correctly, spreading out information so that the people can know what to do and what not to do. It's all about, I should say, WASH education, just educating the community on the simplest thing that you can think of. This is how you open it up. This is how you do this. And not going into a very deep, expert level technique words, but just doing it small and simple. That's where you can start from, and the rest can follow. Thank you.
Okay, if I could contribute. I think the low, for example, let's take a low-income community. The members do not need to be engineers to participate in the strategic assessment management. Why? Because they observe. They know when the water pressure drops. They know when the pump stops working. They know when the wastewater starts to overflow and when the wetland is degrading or when the public toilet becomes unusable. So they have local knowledge, which is I generally call operational data. So the problem is not that most systems are designed to capture value or all of that. So if we include and understand that this operational data is also part of strategic asset management, then they play a vital role because they live with the assets. So I think they are I can call them the foundation actually. So they are included and they must be included. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the audience comments and questions. Now we want to move into our second round questions with our speakers. And this time I would actually like to start with Kambuso. Your work across public health, nutrition, and WASH. And we know that when water and sanitation fail, it is often mothers and children who feel it the most. Where do you think the biggest gap is between how these services are planned and what families on the ground need, and what should governments be doing effectively or differently?
Thank you very much for that question. First of all, the problem that we have as institutions and the government is that we measure success by the number of borehole drilled, the number of toilets constructed, the number of hand wash facilities that we have. But when you look at families, they do not look at success as that. They want something that is reliable, something that is accessible, something that is affordable, something that has, shows dignity to them. So we have to include the mothers, the women in communities to be part of the planning. The other thing is that there's a weak collaboration between water sector, food sector, climate change, So the planning is done in silos. The water sector does its own planning, the food sector does its own planning. But when you look at it in a bigger picture, a child who has malnutrition won't get well if there's no clean water and sanitation at home. So they have to work as a whole. The other thing is that we have to also design infrastructure around the needs of the communities, around the needs of the people around the area that we're building it. We cannot build toilets for women that have got short doors because there's lack of privacy there. So you have to build according to the needs of those women that are there. And we also have to strengthen community data and youth monitoring, which leads to youth-led assessments, just like I said earlier, which help as an organization, were able to do a survey because we were empowered. We saw to say, okay, this is needed. So these things are supposed to be, done. We have to include the women, we have to include the youths when we're planning for things and not just leave them out of the planning stage. Even at the decision-making stage, they have to be included in whatever we're planning. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution. And I do agree that women, mothers, children should be a part of the whole cycle of from planning to execution. And every sector should be working together in its planning from climate, water, and food in order for us to achieve our goals. So thank you for that. Moving on to Dr. Giorgino. Beyond your work at the UNESCO Groundwater Youth Network, you are also a researcher. Across your work on groundwater systems, land subsidence, and coastal resilience, what are the underlying dynamics you think are still most underestimated in shaping long-term water security, particularly in rapidly urbanizing regions?
Okay, thank you very much. I think from the last 3 years, I'm trying to answer 4 questions. The first one is to what extent are rapid growing coastal city exposed to environmental impacts, including groundwater extraction and all that. And the second thing is how this exposure will evolve by 2050. Then I also asked the third question, like, what are the influence of human activity to this exposure? And if you combine human activity, human impact, the evolution of human expansion to this, what will be the impact in 2050? And the outcome is the most underestimated dynamic is what is happening below the ground. And this happens over time. And this what groundwater extraction, which leads to other phenomena like land subsidence. It is today recognized that land subsidence with the gradual sinking of coastal cities is one of the most pressing issues around the world, affecting more than 2 billion people globally. So the 4 outcomes that we can say is the groundwater is depleting, and it is one of the hidden drivers. And this depletion will continue because, especially in coastal city, what we observe globally is the rapid growing population. And for the case of Africa, I think it's special because we know we have the highest growing of population, and this population is concentrated along the coastal area. I also know the coastal area are vulnerable to sea level rise, to groundwater, sea water intrusion. It means what? It means our groundwater along the coastal area are in danger. And this is one of the questions we should focus on. Unfortunately, groundwater is invisible. It means we don't focus enough on this. And I think I'll see this opportunity to thank UNESCO for the recent summit they organized on coastal aquifer to support the creating of awareness and also providing like support to groundwater in coastal area. The second thing is the coupling of urbanization and hydrology. We know urbanization is expansion of land, and this expansion of land means sometimes the use of wetland, which are considered as the recharge area for groundwater. And the third thing is what we call land subsidence. That's as already explained. But the problem with land subsidence is irreversible. And even if we stop doing excess extraction of groundwater, there is what we call the lag time. That's the time that we need to recover our groundwater level that we lost. So definitely I would say there is also a lack of integrated system which consider all these main drivers. Like when we are in this coastal area where most of the population are from, we don't have interconnected investigation between urban expansion, groundwater extraction, land subsidence, sea level intrusion, and sea level rise. So to me, these are the pressing issue we have, especially in this coastal area. And we go move to the semi-arid region. I think it will be groundwater management, managing the recharge and extraction. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I do believe that groundwater is invisible and we don't focus on it enough. And if we're able to combine, like you said, the human activity, the human impact, we would able to see what would the impact be by 2050. So thank you for those comments and your contributions. Moving on to Mr. Aziz. Technology and innovation are often talked about as game changers for water and sanitation in Africa. What does that actually look like in practice? And how do we make sure that these solutions reach the communities that need them the most? Mr. Aziz, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that question. So technology only becomes meaningful when it actually solves problems, right? That's when technology becomes meaningful. So in practice, what it looks like is things like, for example, smarter monitoring systems. So using tools like, for example, mobile data collection. So going on site, using your mobile smart devices, to collect data. Things like geospatial information system, GIS mapping as well, which I've leveraged in the past through ArcGIS and the project I worked on with geohazard risk mapping initiative, and also the global shapers community. And also things like low cost, sensors as well, IoT devices to help to track, water infrastructure is quite important as well. So when we combine the system and make it integrative, we can know what's working. We can know what's failing and also know how to really maintain and channel the investment needed to keep it running. So this particularly aligns with the strategic asset management we've all been talking about earlier, right? So we could also think about predictive maintenance, right? How can we not be just reactive? How can we now start to think ahead and forecast what sort of maintenance that this water structures, water infrastructure needs before it happens? So putting processes in place to ensure that we can, adequately maintain this infrastructure. Because with predictive maintenance, if you know that in the next 5 years, something is going to go wrong, like maybe in terms of like the lifespan of one of the devices associated with a particular water infrastructure. Let's just say, for example, it's the solar system, right, that you have in place. Maybe the batteries, right? After 10 years, 5 to 10 years, the batteries start to lose energy. So what processes can we put in place to make sure that if the battery loses energy, it doesn't necessarily affect the whole system. It keeps it going, right? So that we don't spend too much. We can predict ahead and then put, a backup system to ensure that we can keep it running. So that's where we can think about predictive maintenance. And with data, of course, we can make that possible, because with data, we can do predictive analytics, leveraging on the current data set that we have through those real-time monitoring devices that we have on site. And then finally, the third approach that I'm thinking about is still going to come back to the community-centered innovation, right? We've all been speaking about how we need to actually include the beneficiaries of this solution into the innovation and technology process, right? So the women, the children, the young people, all stakeholders in the community should be integrated into the innovation process. So how can we train them to maintain the systems, like I keep saying, right? How can we train them to better install the systems as well? Because when we train and equip and we empower the community can grow and then even install and have more water systems in place, right? To help to ensure a more strategic asset management, right? So what are also some of the low-cost solutions, right, that can come directly from the community instead of us importing some of this local, some of these raw materials that we use to build this water system? Why not look at the potential of local content? Like, how can we bring in the resources already available within the community? If the community already has steel, then can we use the steel in the community? If the community already has like some piping systems, like the raw material, right? Can we use that? Can we use the people, the skilled individuals there, or even the unskilled individuals? Can we upskill them, right, to actually innovate and keep the systems running? So when I think about integrating technology into water strategic asset management, I'm thinking about those three things. I'll list them again. The first one is real-time monitoring, that's collecting the data. The second one is predictive maintenance. And then the third is the community-centered innovation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for sharing those three approaches on how we can think about technology and innovation. I loved how you hammered on training and upskilling, especially those who are unskilled in our communities, and how we can move from a reactive mindset to a more predictive mindset so that we can be able to have the right processes in place so that these solutions are not only implemented, but they're also maintained. So thank you for those contributions. Last but not least, we have Mr. Agenda. And the question that I have for you is, data modeling and research are increasingly available, but the gap between evidence and policy actions remain wide. What practical steps can be taken to ensure that scientific evidence and youth-led technical research are meaningfully integrated into water planning, maintenance, and investment decisions across Africa? Mr. Agenda, take the floor.
Okay, thank you, Eugenia, for the question. I'm going to be honest. It's a question that has been bothering me for long, because I have written reports with rigorous data. You have recommendations and you have beautiful visualizations. Then when you submit to the policymakers or the seniors, it seems as it falls on dumb ears. So even in conferences you present and they are really interested, you see they are really interested, but now when you produce the report, the reaction is not as you expect, actually. So the gap, I think, the gap between evidence and policy action is not a technical problem. I think it's a social, political, and institutional problem. And if we keep treating it like a data problem, we will keep failing, actually. That's what I think. So let me offer three practical steps based on my own experience as a young researcher. One, I think we need to stop delivering final reports and start delivering decision-ready products. Why do I say that? Policymakers, do not have the time to read a 120-page thesis. I have learned that the hard way, actually. So now, when I produce a research, I also produce a one-page policy brief written in their own language, not my language, but their language, and it must answer three questions only. One, what is the problem? Two, what should we do about it? And what will it cost? And that is actually respecting the water minister's time. And I think it's not about dumping science, because someone can say, but you are going to remove all the scientific part of it. But no, it's not dumping the scientific part. No, this is respecting the reality of the water minister's calendar. So the UN Water Analytic Briefs has a series. They provide perfect templates for this. So if we want evidence to be used, we need to package it for the user. So if you know you have to meet a policy senior, put it in his language in a way that it will be clear and simple, not a 120 pages with good visualizations. They don't have the time to read all of that. And secondly, I think we need to embed young researchers inside government and utility decision making, not as visitors but as members of the team actually. Because I recently saw a model that really pleased me, and I think I can share. In East Africa, they created a young researcher residence position. He was a master's student. He was funded by a small grant, and he sits inside the utility for 12 months. That is the asset of the utility for 12 months. And what is his job? His job is to translate the existing evidence for the engineers and managers to help them document what they are already learning. So the utility now has what I call a living asset registry. That is a maintenance log that is actually used, and the culture of asking what the data says before making decisions. So the cost was tiny, the impact was huge. We need this in every utility, in every water utility, and every Ministry of Water Resource across Africa. And thirdly, but not the least, sorry, we need to change the incentive structure for research and policymakers. What do I mean by that? Right now, researchers are rewarded for publishing high impact journals that policymakers, I'm sorry to say it again, don't really have the time to really read all the high impact journals that we are publishing. So policymakers at their own end are more or less satisfied by getting an announcement that the project is complete, but not for maintaining the asset or using evidences to continue maintaining these assets. But I think we can change this. How? For researchers, for example, donors or universities should require a policy engagement plan as part of every research grant with deliverables like briefings, secondments, or a joint workshop. So there must be a policy brief at the end of every research that you do. And they should fund, and that should be funded because it takes time to build all of this, which is not free. So for policymakers, the African Ministers' Council of Water and the African Union could introduce a system, a strategic asset management evidence use index, which is a simple score that tracks whether countries use data, asset registries, or life cycle costing in their budget submission. What gets measured, I think, can be done actually. So let me stop here, is my practical suggestion, something that any country can start to pilot tomorrow. If you pick, for example, in any country, even from tomorrow, one water or sanitation asset, one treatment plant, whatever we think, we require that every maintenance and investment decisions about these assets for the next 12 months be accompanied by a one-page evidence summary written by a young researcher or a local university student. That summary must include the current condition of the asset, the forecasted cost of doing nothing, and the forecasted benefit of the recommended action. Then, at the end of the year, compare the performance of the assets to similar ones where the decisions were made as usual. I will bet Eugenia and dear participant that everything that is evidence informed always performs better. So I think the Africa vision for 2063 say we need water secure Africa, but I think water security is not built in good intentions. I think we need to build good data that is actually used, and I think this generation is ready for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your contributions. We are going to wrap up the session. I wanted to give each speaker 15 seconds, 1 point. What is your call to action that you want to leave participants, panelists, everyone who joined this discussion with? And we are pressed for time. We're going to strictly end at 10:30. So if you guys can just make it even 10 seconds, starting with Mr. Aziz, if you can give us your call to action and make it quick.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so my call to action for all participants today is to be involved, right? Be involved as much as you can in whatever water intervention solution that's going on in your community, whether from an accountability side of things or even from a more action-oriented side of things, right? Working with non-profit organizations, NGOs specifically, to either carry out any water-related projects, right? It could be wash, it could, if you're passionate about women, you're passionate about the girl child and children, you could, involve yourself in those wash interventions, right?
Great. Yes, I think being involved is important. I want to give everyone a chance. So, Dr. Giorgino. If you can just make
Yeah,
it
let's say
blunt.
the main message to me that was said today is water security is no more just about having water, but it's not an ecosystem. It's about the people, the ground, the city, and the water system that evolve over time. Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Kambuso?
For me, my call to action is that we must strengthen community participation and youth engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. Last but not least, Mr. Riley.
Yes, I would say for governments and universities or utility donors across Africa, before funding any new system, who will maintain it, who will monitor it, who is accountable when it fails, and how do young researchers and local communities include in those decisions? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Today's discussion has been very fruitful. We were reminded that water is not simply a resource, but is deeply connected to dignity, health, resilience, economic transformation, and Africa's future. And like we said, the speakers have given us our call to action. Let's be involved. Let's strengthen our communities, include youth participation so that water security can be solved in our communities. So continue to stay engaged with the Africa Dialogue series. I want to sincerely thank the United Nations Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, all organizers and partners, and distinguished panelists. Thank you again. And this concludes the youth stage number 1. Continue to be involved, and we encourage you to stay connected. So thank you guys again. And this concludes the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
We keep in touch.
Thank you
Yes,
for
we
the
keep in touch.
presentation.
Stay tuned. Every week in
Thank
May, we'll have the Africa Dialogue series.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.